We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Edgecast. This is going to be in the LOVEseat format with two people, and I am going to be doing something a little different. This is going to be a bit of a Dave Rubin-esque interview with a fellow by the handle Carp Merchant. Say hello, Carp.
Hello.
So Carp Merchant is somebody I bumped into on Discord, I'd say about a month ago, and in the back of my head I thought, hey, this is an interesting fellow, sounds like he's got an interesting life story that I think our listeners would enjoy hearing. So, as with any life story, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
That would be the Meccan region in Saudi Arabia, and mostly it was in the city of Mecca.
So what's what's life in Mecca like?
Oh man, I mean, it's not like anything that I can like compare it to. It's even pretty different from other Saudi cities. This is a city that's built on mountains, like just a valley with a lot of fucking hills and mountains, and people from all over the world go there, and some of them stay, right?
So it's like Arizona if Arizona had a tourist industry.
Sure, but if it was like condensed into one fucking city, and there are seasons where there are literally millions congregating into one area. Whenever you go to Google Images and look up Mecca Grand Mosque, you'll see like 2 million people praying around that fucking black cube.
And the endless tent city with the air conditioning and the pedestrian causeways.
That the good benevolent Saudi government did not use on the Syrian refugees, not a one. But they did offer to build 200 mosques in Germany, so that's nice.
Money well spent.
Mm-hmm.
So I take it's a fairly cosmopolitan city.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are casinos, movie theaters, bars, except those don't actually exist. It's weird. It's people obviously go there for religious, ritualistic reasons. And there are Meccan natives, although like I don't really identify with them. I never integrated well into the culture that was supposed to be my native culture. So there are a lot of reasons for that. I was a weird kid.
So let's back up. There's gambling and bars, so alcohol. This does not sound very haram.
Yeah. No, I was obviously being facetious. There are absolutely none of those things. There isn't a single movie theater in Saudi Arabia. There isn't a gambling. If somebody was like gambling in their house with a group of friends, and the government caught wind of it somehow, like let's say one of your friends is like a fucking asshole and reported you, you're pretty much toast. If alcohol is fucking illegal, like a drug, if you're selling alcohol, not only did you smuggle it, but if you sell it too, you're pretty much done.
So I don't really know how. You're not just chopping off your hand, chopping off your head, I take it.
Nah, it's not chopping off your head. If you're dealing with alcohol, you'll be lashed, for this arbitrary set of numbers, and then you'll be rotting in a cell for God knows how many years. Well, if you're actually dealing drugs like narcotics, like hard drugs, you would get the death penalty. I remember one time I was flying back to Saudi, and there was this like customs card that you have to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
And on the top, it said in bold red letters, "Death to drug trafficking," in English and in Arabic, which was more grammatically sound. And I kept it just to show my Canadian friends when I went back.
Mm-hmm. Sounds sounds
Yeah,
like Duterte has been emulating somebody. So, um, obviously, life in Saudi Arabia is extremely religious, extremely pious, and naturally, people want, especially young boys, want to rebel against the prevailing culture.
yeah,
Yet Saudi Arabia has been able to maintain this extremely rigid culture, and the only
yeah,
way I could imagine that being accomplished is through a pretty thorough indoctrination
yeah.
process starting
That's
from
one of them.
childhood.
Yeah,
So I'd imagine the first place they would start with were most very authoritarian and controlling government start is with the state education system.
yeah. So okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what my education was like. Right, I went to private school,
Mm-hmm.
but the way it works is the same for how public school works. You get a generalized education up to grade 9, and for secondary school you can enroll in like a general program or a specialized program. And I got into a school that specializes in the sciences, and I fucking promise you, you will graduate not knowing what the scientific method is. That's because no matter what program you choose, you're going to be subjected to mandatory religious education that is strictly Wahhabi, without any education or insight into other religions or schools of thought in Islam. The Saudi education system is like plagued by indoctrination, memorization, and terrible teachers who are failed scientists or professionals from neighboring countries in the Middle East. That's it. That is if you're in a private school, that is, and that's supposed to be the better option, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of the aforementioned dull and almost consciously attack critical and independent thought. And I was a bad student, so maybe my disinclination to perform academically well actually helped me foster some capacity for critical thought, and that was integral to my heuristic.
So
Yeah,
just quickly, so we're talking like an old school Catholic education. So in biology class, there would be not, I take it more than just no mention of, say, evolution.
there is evolution is strictly banned. So if you actually meet a Saudi citizen who has graduated with an undergrad in biology from a Saudi university, you have to wonder what he's an expert in exactly, and that's scary,
So
right?
what's their explanation about where all the oil comes from?
uh, there used to be algae, and then long time passes, now there's oil. That's how it was explained to us.
I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong.
but there's obviously no in-depth like analysis on the origin of species and uh, missing links and all of that. There's like zero mention of that, because you have to understand, even though I went to a secondary school that quote unquote specializes in the sciences, we still had to take mandatory religious classes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the literalist tradition, and in the purest fundamentalist Wahhabist tradition. Okay, everything that is mentioned in the Quran happened literally. That's how we were that's how we were taught, basically.
And how do most students react to this? Do they just go with the flow? Is there at least some background acknowledgement that this is shit, but
No, they go with the flow. They go with the flow, and they dare not question it. I actually got in trouble sometimes because I would ask questions, and because I was just so goddamn curious. I mean, the Gog and Magog story especially is really weird, and I'm like, how is it that this story isn't detailed enough? What do you mean there are these four-armed, Goru type fucking people with swords and bows that are going to come from the east of the Black Sea or whatever? And what do you mean that one of them like loosens an arrow into the sky and it'll come down covered in blood and it'll make them think that they killed God, but then God sends them birds carrying worms that they will drop on them, and the worms will eat them. Like, what the fuck is that? It always baffled me, and I would get in trouble for asking questions like that. Like.
So, fun fact, back in the day, so I don't know what this was originally called, but the Catholic Church had these big conventions, and they were taking all the random scripture from their traditions, and they were trying to figure out what is the canonical Bible.
Yeah.
And as crazy as the Bible is, even the Catholic Church had to acknowledge back in like the 1400s that there was a shit ton of crap in the scriptures that just made no fucking sense. So they just cut it out and said, let's just pretend this doesn't exist because this is a little silly. Sorry, I wish I could remember what the convention's names are, but apparently they cut out a lot of the scripture and just said it was not canon.
That's brilliant. Because never mind that some of the stories in the Bible are really out there. You know what I mean?
What they left in was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that says something. That's saying something. I kind of actually want to read those now. What did they left out? I bet it's like more stories on Gog and Magog, maybe one of them.
Well, considering both religions come from the same region and religions tend to borrow from one another, I wouldn't be too surprised to find out that most of the stories that the Catholic Church cut out wound up in the Quran as the Muslims rolled in all these other traditions, as you do when you're creating a new religion. God knows that Christianity borrowed heavily from its predecessor religions.
In terms of what the Quran has borrowed from the Bible, to my knowledge, I don't think it got anything off of the New Testament.
No, I can't imagine they would, but I imagine with the Old Testament, even some of the older scripture, they would have borrowed stories from there.
There's a lot of Old Testament in the Quran. There's a lot of it.
I'm not surprised.
And there are weird differences, by the way. Like in the Bible, Noah was 600 years old when the flood happened, and like in the Quran or in the Islamic narrative, I mean, Noah was 950 years old. That's so weird.
Did they explicitly state the age?
Yeah, explicitly state it, dude. This is a tangent, but so Muhammad was illiterate, right? But he was a merchant, so he should at least be able to do some sums in his head, yes. Right?
He should have been able to do basic mathematics.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the most explicit, unambiguous, like clear as fucking day set of verses in the Quran are about the unequal distribution of inheritance between male and female heirs and male and female relatives, and almost every case of relation, whatever those boys and girls have to the person who died, the boys get more than, like, the boys get twice as much as the girls, and it's mentioned in fucking fractions. Okay, they get half of that, or they would get like a fraction of what they would make if they were their sons or something like that. There's you'll hear about algebra being developed to simplify these inheritance laws.
Yeah, I've heard that one once or twice. I don't know how much validity it has, because it's almost, at least where I live, kind of just an urban legend about Islam that they had to come up with a new form of mathematics because some of the governmental inheritance crap was so complicated.
I'm not sure if like they invented algebra, but maybe developed it. But it makes sense because a lot of the scientific development that happened in the Islamic world was to basically, well, he was motivated to systemize Islamic, the Islamic practice. So, I forget which one of them. God, my brain isn't where it should be right now. I forget his name, but basically, the Muslim scientists back in the Middle Ages uh, found a way to prove that the Earth is round, and that and its circumference, like what Eratosthenes did before him, like at fucking 250 BC, which by the way is a much more impressive miracle to me than any of the miracles that Muhammad claimed to has done.
Personally, I can't, even in this day and age, I can't fathom how in like 2000 BC you would even go about calculating the circumference of the Earth.
It was like 250 BC actually, but
250.
yeah, the Carl Sagan like explains how he did it, and I'm just like, if you showed me that video before our first geometry class, I would have flipped. I would have been like, I love geometry now. Show me exactly how this nigga did it. You know what I mean? But yeah, yeah, a lot of scientific development in the Muslim world happened because they wanted practical utility for it to give the Islamic Empire an edge on other states and civilizations. Like they understood the power of knowledge. Really, they wouldn't call it science back then. But yeah, anyways, so that was a bloody tangent. I was just saying that it's ironic, the Quran in Islam is often defended by people who claim to be for equality between the sexes and genders, even though like you can't really.
We'll be getting into that one a little later.
Yeah, we'll get into that one a little later, but you just can't claim that these verses are, they're just poetry. It's just poetry. It's up to interpretation. No, it clearly states in terms of fractions how much the boys get into whatever.
It'd almost be like trying to say the original American Constitution was totally against slavery, even though it said that slaves were property, and you only got the slave didn't vote. The slave owner got like 3/5 of a vote for every slave. It just clearly it endorses slavery as an idea.
You would think that the entirety of the Quran would be written like a legal document. That way, there isn't like room for disagreement and ambiguities, and you would have different interpretations. But God, in His infinite wisdom, decided to send this epic poem of a book where sometimes you'll get pretty detailed and technical.
Not to mention the amount of contradictions that are in there. Again, perhaps that's something to talk about later on. Something that's always kind of puzzled me in the back of my head is, so there's this concept of the American dream. Single detached house, white picket fence, a car, nothing fancy, but there's this sort of ideal life that a lot of Americans hold, that they're trying to work towards. So maybe not so much anymore, but certainly historical. There's sort of this axiological belief of how life ought to be. I've always been a little curious, and I think this says a lot about a culture, to ask the question, well, what is their sort of American dream?
In terms of Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, what is the Saudi dream? Like, what is the ideal life for, the average family?
So this is actually where I can illustrate a little better for you what life in Saudi is like. So it's an interesting question. I don't know whether to answer it from the view of the state or the citizen. I'm going to go with the citizen, because I can actually speak for the latter. So the indoctrinated ideal way of life in that country is that males would have careers that make them enough wealth to uplift them in status, and then marry a woman, start a family, and he is mandated by religious duty to be the sole provider of the family. Okay, well, the wife can also help and in the provision area, but she actually has no obligation to do that.
Hmm.
So if you're going to succeed as a man, you have to make sure that you are able to take care of an entire family on your own, right? Uh, so a lot of the ideal, Saudi life revolves around the Islamically informed fixed gender roles, and the woman, of course, she is to marry said man and have kids and raise them with good morals, right? And she is to obey the husband and meet his needs,
Hmm.
and the husband by law is the head of the house, right? The woman is subject to his command unless he commands her to do haram stuff. Uh, of course, that's not how many people live, because it varies from house to house. Even though the Saudi state is orthodox, ultra conservative, what have you, uh, you'd be surprised just how much it varies when it comes to households in terms of being moderate or a little lenient on this or that, or just out of pure fucking pragmatism, right? Like the wife isn't just gonna wait for the husband to climb up a little higher in his career. She's probably going to ask her dad for some help, and then
Hmm.
that'll be his second source of income. But that'll actually make the guy feel a little shit because he's not filling his role, right? Uh,
So I
but
take it in the
basically, it's
average. I take it in the average Saudi Arabian household, they have pretty much all the amenities you would find in your average Western household.
sorry, all the what?
All the amenities you would find in a modern Western household, in terms
Uh,
of items for the wife, like vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, clothes
oh, no, no,
washers.
no, no, no. That is, yeah, though, yeah, obviously like house appliances, but if you're middle class, if you're like middle class and higher, uh, usually the wife wouldn't be doing those things.
Really?
Usually they would hire a maid.
Oh, of
A
course.
maid, yeah, a maid from some shithole country, and these women who are desperate to make ends meet and send money to their family because of God knows what uh, ills they're suffering from, and it's not a pleasant existence, being a serf working in Saudi Arabia. A lot of maids get harassed, a lot of maids get abused, a lot of and even if they're not uh, harassed and abused in that way, they're just not. A lot of them are just not treated well because they're seen as lesser. It's a curious thing. Women aren't allowed to drive in Saudi, but what a lot of richer families do is that they'll hire a chauffeur, a male chauffeur, and he will drive her wherever she wants to go. But you have to understand that in Saudi Arabia, and which is all these weird cultural things are informed by the Wahhabi Islamic doctrine. You cannot have an unrelated or unrelated man and woman in the same confined space. All right, the genders must be segregated. But for whatever reason, because the chauffeurs are of you lesser human status, right? Because they're from some poorer country,
I take it
then
somewhere in Africa.
yeah, I guess some of them would be from Africa, but that's not as common. You get like Bangladeshi, Filipino, Indonesian, sometimes Indian, sometimes Pakistani, a lot of Arabs, a lot of Saudis look down upon people from those countries, even though to be frank, like India, the Philippines, these are clearly better countries to, well, I guess you'd have more rights in those countries than you would in Saudi Arabia, especially if you're a
And you
woman.
could argue they're more economically prosperous given the amount of resources they have.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and so yeah, so that's so yeah. So if you're middle class, right, you wouldn't, or if you're upper class, you wouldn't dare subject your wife to those lowly tasks. You would hire a maid for her to do that. And of course, you're a man who's busy with his career, right? You don't. Why should you drive her around? You hire a chauffeur.
You're at
So,
work. I mean, how can you drive her around?
yeah. Or you're out doing things with your friends, and you don't just want to, drive your wife, who is allowed to drive even if she wanted to badly, even if she got a license from another country, even if she got an international license. The bullshit about women not being able to drive it's not that there is a clearly articulated piece of legislation that says women are not allowed to drive. It's just that there are no driving schools for women, and the government just won't approve one. And if you don't have a driving school for women, then they can't get a driver's license.
I was
If you
about
can't get
to
a
ask, they
driver's
can't just
license,
challenge the test without taking. You have to take a class, an accredited,
yep,
from an accredited institution. Okay.
yep, and that's how Saudi is basically keeping women away from the streets. And my God, if you see some of the rhetoric against against women driving like this, you'll see an article that is written by some doctor supposedly saying that the women driving will lead to damage to the ovaries because of the way the pelvis is angled on the driver's seat. Like, why is that different?
Wow, I thought the
Or
SJWs were bad for their anti-science rhetoric.
oh man, a sociologist. I don't know if he was a sociologist. He was something. He was like he was some fake expert. Like in another article or news broadcast. I can't remember. This was like last decade. Uh, said that if women are allowed to drive, there will be no more virgins. That's the statement. Zero virgins if women were allowed to drive. They're just
I'd love to read the train of logic on that.
like you have to understand, like sometimes you would watch memory TV, right? And the stuff that you see is bizarre, right?
Yeah.
Like this shit, you can't, it's so absurd, you can't make it up. All right. Even the staff writers at fucking The Onion are like, this is either genius or it's so ridiculous it has to be true.
Well, again, we're not doing much better in the West these days. The difference
Oh man.
between freaking Salon or BuzzFeed or even CNN half the time. I swear, just a year ago, The Onion could have been writing some of those articles. They're so freaking ridiculous. Okay,
We can
so
get into that later. Yeah.
this is sort of actually very interesting because I'm trying to find
Yeah.
out, like, okay, there's all of this story about all these stories about women being oppressed in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So what the hell does a wife do with most of her day? If she's not doing the household chores, she's not going in. Well, maybe she's going to the mall, but she has to be escorted if memory serves.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, okay. So there's a reason why obesity is a problem in Saudi Arabia.
as it is everywhere.
Uh,
I
as
blame the Lay's potato chip company personally.
well, it's especially the case amongst women, um, unless that changed since last I've heard.
Given the worldwide trends, I highly doubt it.
But even with men, because you have to understand, right? You don't get to drink unless you know somebody who's a good smuggler, or if you're clever and skilled enough to make your own. But then again, that's not entirely fun. You want to drink the good stuff, right? So you can't drink. There are no movie theaters, for fuck's sake. The cities, they're not built for sophisticated cultural enjoyment. That there's not a whole lot to do, and the religion is restrictive on what's permissible, right? So you can't have premarital sex, so you can't go and fuck around, right? Jerking off, that's frowned upon by, as is claimed by some scholars, and then some other scholars, quote unquote scholars, by the way, will tell you that no, it's just downright haram. So you can't fucking jerk off, right? You can't enjoy music without feeling a little bit bad because for whatever reason, any instrument that is not the voice or percussive instruments is haram. What worldly joys can you partake in? There's food, so you're gonna eat, and then you're gonna get fat. But like, and especially if you're a woman, right, who isn't on her feet, right, especially if you're illiterate, right, because there are a lot of women in Saudi Arabia who are illiterate, and it's kind of tragic because they have to have some male guardian's permission to seek an education.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd be infantilized to the point where they would have to depend on their guardians. And if they have a maid, what are they gonna do? They're gonna have kids, and then they're never gonna shave off that fat. They're just gonna stay obese because you don't get to jog as a woman unless you're actually covered head to toe, and that's not exactly fun to do in a desert climate.
I can't imagine that's much fun to do anywhere. So
Yeah.
you obviously kind of got to your wits' end living in this sort of a crazy, screwed up, nonsensical world, and with the very fact that we're talking, it should clearly indicate you decided to leave Saudi Arabia.
Oh yeah.
So how did that come to pass?
So I'm gonna go back a little bit to the education thing. Like I mentioned, I would ask teachers certain questions that are a little taboo to ask, like why are frogs exactly haram to eat? They don't have fangs. They don't fall under the criteria of animals that you can't eat. And then they would give me stupid answers, and then I'm like, well, what you gave? Anyways, I basically, and then I would get in trouble if I kept asking questions. So I realized that I'm not going to learn anything if I ask them questions. So I have to teach myself. And I was lucky enough to have like this large collection of outdated encyclopedia books. And I was always a curious cunt, and I still am. So I would just binge on these encyclopedia books. Those encyclopedia books were written when the Soviet Union was still a thing. Anyways, yeah, I didn't read much fiction growing up, but the encyclopedia books really did capture my imagination for the outside world. By the way, the education system, like the schools are obviously segregated.
Oh yeah, that was just granted.
Yeah. Unless except for the international schools, but that's reserved for internationals, and the only Saudi citizens that go there have like some special connection. That's the only place where you can actually learn about evolution. Anyways, so I was always curious about the outside world. The Saudi Arabia is minimalist in terms of culture, like in terms of works of art, architecture, movies. There are only like 9 Saudi movies. All of them were made last decade, and they were showcased in international festivals, maybe. But there are no movie theaters in Saudi Arabia, right? The television shows. There's like one sketch comedy type show that would play during Ramadan, and that would be it. So. And I just didn't get along with the other kids. I was kind of like a reclusive, amateurish autodidact, so to speak. And
You were the kid at the back of the class, just reading his book, just.
Yeah. Well.
Well, not in class, of course. You would probably get in trouble.
Not in class, but like I have to stress that the encyclopedia books were really the only thing I had. uh, and it made me want to study English a bit uh, diligently so that I can appreciate the material that I was reading and also appreciate the media that I was consuming, which was largely American and British. Uh, you know, that's kind of like your window to the outside world if you haven't traveled a lot when you were young. But I was actually lucky enough to be able to do that, and I would always get what's the opposite of not the opposite of homesick. It's something like homesickness to places that you've been to, but they're not actually your home.
I think this is the stereotypical, well, at least in the West, there's sort of this stereotype about the kid growing up in a small town, and they want to go to the big city.
Yeah.
They're always hearing about how much better life is in the big city. They're
Yeah.
sick and tired of their sort of. They see if they stayed in the town what their life is going to be like. You can go to a lot of movies, and this archetypically like this very funny enough conservative religious lifestyle, and they want to go to the big city where everything's very exciting and chaotic, and there's really no taboos. They can be themselves, and there's going to be a place for them.
Let me give you an idea. I loved Aladdin. I loved watching it. Even now when I hear when I listen to the song, A Whole New World, I get a little sentimental. I get a little bit of the feelies, and I watched that movie, and that's supposed to be Arabia. It's obviously like fantasized Orientalist depiction of an Arabian kingdom, and I would look outside to what it actually is like, and I'd look back at the TV, and I'm like, I like this better. I like this fantasy world better, but I know for a fucking fact that this does not represent anything of the culture that I come from, because it's not exactly like we not preserve, like we don't engage in the 1001 Nights stories, because it's un-Islamic,
Well, I would question the mental health of anybody who thinks that something out of a Disney fairy tale is true.
Yeah, obviously, but the point is that I appreciated the things that the West produced for enjoyment, and then I was like, this is I basically I was being culturalized. Is that a word? I was being cultured by the West even when I wasn't there. And
cultural indoctrination, cultural propaganda is another term I've heard. That's been there's always been talk about during the Cold War.
Yeah.
One of the things you'll hear about is the CIA cultivated modern art.
Oh yeah.
They financed a lot of it, and the idea was they'd show the Soviets, and hoping it would trickle into Soviet society, and they would see how creative we in the West were, how free we were to come up with all these crazy ideas, and how fucking wealthy we were that we were able to afford these completely impractical works.
Yeah. But it's kind of true though. What's interesting about that is, have you heard about the CIA wanting to build a department for memes?
I wouldn't be too surprised, but I haven't actually heard that directly.
Yeah, like that makes a whole lot of sense.
I know a lot of companies today are through their social media teams are trying to understand memes, and they're, of course, because they're the corporate institutions, and they're pretty strangulated in what's considered culturally appropriate. The last I heard is they're all universally failing horribly at it. They don't seem to understand memetics at all, which I kind of sit there and I go, it's actually not all that fucking hard. Here's what you do. You kick back, you wait for somebody to come up with something, you go, haha, that's funny, and you steal the idea.
And exactly, and you share it.
Yes, that's how memetics works, and it
that's how memes work.
builds up as, if you've heard Jordan Peterson talk about
Yeah,
archetypical characters. Well, you
yeah,
take an individual, you take 100 individuals, you distill them. Well, through the internet's process of sharing these ideas, it's constantly distilling these ideas into purer and purer forms of some sort of core idea behind all of them. And
yeah,
at a certain point, you get to the at a certain point you get this pure distilled idea, and it
yeah,
resonates with people for
yeah.
whatever reason. It just hits the brain in the right spot, triggers the dopamines. It's if you have you watched Jordan Peterson? He analyzed Pepe the Frog for
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
the
half
metaphysics
hour.
of Pepe, dude. Like Jordan Peterson, fucking, well, he didn't save my life, but just watching his lectures actually helped me uh, with a lot of stuff that I was going through uh, this year, for fuck's sake.
This year has been, oh my god, the last 12
Yeah,
months have been,
yeah,
it will go
I went to
down
see
in
him.
the history books as probably one of the most insane 12
Oh
months
yeah,
humanity has ever seen. Things are still flying off the rails. Things are crazy. I mean, things are moving so fast now.
I actually saw Peterson live, like he's a performer. I saw his lecture 2 days ago.
Oh, you actually
On the
attended.
Yeah, I actually attended it, and
I would have given my
it was
right arm to be there.
yo. He I know he said before in his videos that he thinks out loud. That's what his lectures are mostly like. But you don't really get a sense of that until you actually see him do it in person. Because a lot of the times he's just looking down, and he really just seems like he's thinking out loud and makes occasional eye contact. And my favorite line out of that whole talk. I mean, it'll lack context, but you'll understand the sentiment behind it. If religion is the opiate of the masses, communism is the methamphetamine of the masses. I tell you.
That
He
sounds like
said
Jordan
that.
Peterson. That sounds exactly like something he would
Yeah,
say.
he was pretty like emphatic and angry about it too.
So,
Uh,
so
Sorry,
you're
continue.
obviously somewhere in and around Toronto if you managed to make it to that lecture. So you decided to move to Canada. Why
Yeah,
Canada?
I'll tell you why. America, I have a weird relationship with the U.S. I was actually like this close to being born there, but my mother decided that she didn't want to potentially die in the land of the infidels, so she robbed me of my freedom. If only she gave birth to me there, then I wouldn't have.
Dual citizenship.
Oh yeah. By the way, like an American citizenship will get you out of a lot of trouble in Saudi Arabia. It could go a long way. You'd be surprised. Uh, but and I spent a considerable amount of time in the United States in my youth. But 9/11 happened, right? And the kebabs were a little nervous about going there. So my parents thought that the next best thing would be the country right directly above it, right? That's like America point two, right?
It's
Uh,
like America, only more socialist.
yeah. I arrived in Canada. What was it? Something like 2004, 2005. It was just a vacation thing. I actually landed in Montreal, and all I knew about Canada was that the people were friendly. And I remember there were a group of skinheads, swastika tattoos and all, and
In
they were,
Montreal?
yeah, in Montreal, and they were begging for money, right? And they were super polite with me, and they complimented my Megadeth T-shirt, and I'm like, okay, I gave them a toonie, and I'm like, wow, even the racists are nice in this country.
I'm kind of surprised. Like, no, doesn't know about Rush, doesn't know about maple syrup, doesn't know about
Yeah.
poutine, doesn't.
Yeah, no, that stuff I had to like gradually learn about. But the decision to actually move here, I was much older than that by then, and I just basically got the opportunity to study here,
Hmm.
and it was an easy decision for me to make because I've been to this country beforehand, and I fell in love with the civility of it. You know what I mean? And for
Really?
fuck's sake, you people have grass. That's a thing that people take for granted. Well, they take for granted because they never had to grow up in a fucking desert. But like, it's it stands for everything that Saudi Arabia does not. The I know that there are some issues with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but that's something that I would want to hang on my wall because it has that first one, freedom of conscience.
Ah, yes, good old number 2B.
Yeah. And I'm like, what wouldn't I give to actually have that? And I have my problems with Canada, but I mean, they border on the superficial, but this is easily one of the best fucking countries to live in.
Oh, no, no kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
have you ever been to Vancouver in
Yes.
summer? And you just
Yes.
walk, just fucking walk from up and down False Creek
Yes.
around Stanley Park is just like,
Yep.
holy fuck. I
Done
mean,
that.
people, I understand why everyone wants to come to this town, and you still have people running around bitching that everything ain't perfect. For God's sakes, this is in ancient religions when they talk about
Yeah.
the freaking promised land. You're
Yeah.
living in it.
Yeah. Basically.
This is as good as it gets. I mean, people use Vancouver as a freaking backdrop for science fiction movies because it looks so freaking awesome and pristine and it looks like it's from the future.
What was it? Wasn't it Fringe, that which was supposed to take place in Boston, Massachusetts? So, like, they would have like an aerial shot of Boston, but then all the street shots are fucking like Vancouver.
Yes.
And if you've ever been to Vancouver, you can tell that it's Vancouver, and like that's not Boston.
Well,
But
given
yeah,
as somebody who grew up in the Vancouver area, there was
yeah,
with all the movies and TV shows that get filmed there, there's almost
yeah,
a game try and guess where they are.
yeah. I can imagine. I've been to Vancouver only once. I regret being there for such a short time, but it really is a nice city, and I that's not you don't often say that about a Canadian city because God, the Greater Toronto area is awful. Like there are very few little oases of like nice architecture in areas, but even then they're not the best that they could be. I don't know. I have this weird thing with like shitty architecture, especially the brutalist like concrete mess that was like a fad in the 60s. I hate it so much. I
You really
hate
don't
it
like
so
that?
much.
I
It's
actually kind of like that stuff.
I hate it. I don't know, man. It reminds me of like the sentiment that I get out of it is something that's somewhat iconoclastic. I know that's not the most appropriate interpretation, but I never got beauty when I was in Saudi Arabia, right? We don't have nice looking buildings. Every now and then you'll have some weird eccentric building, but even then it's not impressive. It's just weird looking. It's just like a house or something.
That's most modern architecture, in my opinion.
And like, yeah, well, fair enough, but we have like two skyscrapers and that's it in the city of Riyadh. It's just two fucking skyscrapers. Well, I don't know, in Mecca, I guess that fucking clock tower could count just by like its height, but the rest of the country is so ugly you wouldn't believe it. And so like I guess I just had a strong distaste towards poor architecture, especially since I've been to Europe and like my God, it's breathtaking to me. And no, Jordan Peterson made the same fucking point, and I thought I was crazy, but I guess I'm not. I'm not the only one who thinks that you shouldn't have shitty buildings. You especially shouldn't have buildings that are just made of fucking concrete. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but the point is, yeah. So Canada isn't the most beautiful place that you can find in that regard. Vancouver ranks a little bit higher though, like when you compare it to fucking Ottawa and Toronto.
Well, Ottawa's
Much.
just full of government buildings, so the 1960s concrete.
Yep, yep. And I'm like, well, I shouldn't advocate for destroying it, but I mean, replace it, make it better. At least throw in some paint on it. You know what I mean? Get creative, make it look like a Skittle cocktail. I don't know. But no, the country's beauty is in the natural landscapes. Canada is crazy about its landscapes and nature. It's like every Canadian film with a budget has to have shots of like the flat plains of the prairies, or just the landscape covered in pure white snow. Even like that movie Polytechnique, but I don't know if you've seen it. It's the one that...
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, it's just by... I'm butchering it because I don't speak French. Denis Villeneuve. He directed a film that is about that tragic shooting at the Polytechnique University or college.
Yeah, the Montreal Polytechnic.
Yeah. And even that movie had a shot of like fucking landscapes. In a suicide scene of all things. Anyways, yeah. So I was familiar with Canada before I decided to move here, and when I moved here, I knew I made the right choice. Choice in location could have I could have made a better choice of the location. But I'm not going to complain.
There's worse places in Canada to move. You could have moved to Hamilton, and that's an old steel town if you've been there. And
God, yeah,
hideous architect, absolutely disgusting, but
yeah,
brutally utilitarian.
Yeah, or some areas in Scarborough which will make you want to fucking shoot yourself in the face, like. But I guess my sensitivity to it has a lot to do with it reminding me of just shitty places in Saudi. That's it. That's all. That's all it is. It's me not getting over shit. Full circle.
So far from your description is pretty much Canadians are retardedly nice. Our architecture can use some improvements. So I take it you think a lot of the bullshit flying around with like Bill. It was a motion 416. Now I'm trying to know 408.
The Islamophobia motion, right?
Yeah, I take it you regard that as being a complete crock of shit. In the impression I'm getting.
Okay, so to be fair, those were like I mostly gave you like earlier impressions from since I moved here. I haven't told you my experience with feminism and postmodernism and realizing just how awful those things were, but I can skip over that. The motion, the Islamophobia motion, which a lot for whatever reason, a lot of our American associates and on Discord think that it's a bill that banned Islamophobia, and it's like it's not. It's just the government, publicly declaring that we don't like Islamophobia and it's a bad thing.
Hey, could you quickly define what Islamophobia is for us real quick?
No.
What are you, some kind of bigot?
Yeah.
Just want a definition.
Oh God, it was stupid.
Can you just please tell me what I'm not supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's her name? Ikra Khalid. That's the...
Yeah, I always forget how to pronounce her name.
That's the MP who proposed this motion, right?
Yeah, if memory serves, before the Montreal mosque shooting, she had proposed it once before, or at least something similar to it, and everyone told her basically, we don't have any problems, what are you talking about? The mosque shooting happened, and everyone freaked out, because apparently one person is actually violent in a country of 35 million people.
Yep. To be fair, let's be fair here. It was a terrorist attack against Muslims, where six perfectly decent men, as far as as far as we know.
As far as the
were-
shooter knew.
As far as the shooter knew, you know, were murdered tragically, and you know, I was actually I remember. Oh man, I remember the media covering it was so fucking disgusting, and the reaction on Twitter, these fucking shits on Twitter who decided to use that tragedy to somehow like as rhetoric against Trump's travel ban, Muslim ban,
Which makes
and it's
absolutely
like
no sense.
that those two things have nothing to do with each other. Don't use a tragedy for your shitty agenda. Anyways,
So just a question. While you've been in Canada, have you observed any Islamophobia? Or what you would consider Islamophobia, hatred of Muslims?
I have observed no such thing. I have observed the opposite, but to be fair, I most of it was on campus. When I'm out in the public, like no, I didn't get any of that. I got like one, you know, troubled looking homeless woman calling me a packy at one point. But you know, racial slurs don't do anything to me. I just kind of it's actually kind of funny, especially when you get the wrong race.
Well, they are homeless, so they're probably crazy anyways.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. But no, I haven't noticed that in the least. The campus that I was in, especially was especially accommodating. The only kind of Islamophobia I saw was like from other Muslims. You know what I mean? Because like there was like the Ahmadiyya group, right? And then there was like I remember some Sunni woman was just being like argumentative with them, and it caused a bit of a stir, and that was it. It was like trouble between Muslims. The first time I heard the word Islamophobia, by the way, I have such a serious fucking problem with that word.
I don't like the word. If you look at everything else linguistically in English,
Yeah.
Racism, it has to do with the race. Anti-Semitism, again, has to do with the race.
Yeah.
Islamophobia seems to be unique because everywhere else in the English language, linguistically, it's of the people, and it's usually some sort of more or less physically defined or in the case of anti-Semitism, more loosely religiously defined, but it's always of the person, whereas Islamophobia is unique because it's not talking about people, it's talking about an idea, and that makes it unique in the English language. And I don't think a lot of people really, when I say I don't like the term Islamophobia, they go, well, that must prove that you're an Islamophobe, and I go, well, no, wait one moment. I actually agree that, yes, there should be a term for people who hate Muslims. However, I think the term should be Muslimophobe.
Exactly.
Because you don't... with Muslims, this is, again, the soft bigotry of low expectations, just how ignorant we are.
Exactly.
In the West, is that you're talking about a religion, and just like Christianity, there's many denominations of Islam, from, yes, the Wahhabis to the Ahmadis, you got the Shiites, the Sunnis, and you cannot tell me that somebody living in the Philippines who is a Muslim, or Indonesia who's a Muslim, is going to have the same religious doctrine as someone living in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. You're fucking nuts to tell me that.
Okay, so I'm gonna kebab pill you on that. But first I want to start with Islamophobia, right? So when I was a Muslim, I heard the word Islamophobia, and I'm like, how can you be irrationally afraid of an idea? That's like a very strange phobia, right? But then I discovered that the definition of Islamophobia is
Wait, can I guess what you were about to say next?
Yeah.
You were about to tell me it was created by the Muslim Brotherhood.
No. It was. I actually looked into it. It wasn't that it was created by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was actually by some French writer from like way early in the 20th century, and it didn't mean what it means now. It meant something actually completely fucking different. I don't know about that narrative that the Muslim Brotherhood used it, but it's not like Islamists or Islamist apologists don't use it often, or even Muslim apologists don't use it often. They use it.
Even if
They
they didn't
they
invent the
adopted it.
term, it could be very easily argued that they've appropriated it
Yeah,
to fill their propagandic message.
sure. I haven't. I've yet to see the Muslim Brotherhood doing it, but I have seen like other unsavory apologists use it. But you see, this is the thing. When I was a Muslim and I learned the definition of Islamophobia, that being a discrimination or prejudice towards / against Muslims or Islam. Okay, conflating the people with the ideology or the religion.
And as I pointed
Okay.
out, it's insane to think that everyone in this demographic believes the exact same thing.
But which is like, it shows. Here's the thing. Even when I was a Muslim, I was actually really annoyed with people defending Islam when they had no idea what they're talking about. And that word, just basically monopolizes Islam and Muslims, especially at a time when even the moderate Muslims want to do this. They want to separate themselves from the lunatics, right?
I've had one.
They're not doing a good job about it.
I've had one
Yeah.
great conversation with a coworker, and
Yeah.
they refused to believe that ISIS was Muslim. That's how little they wanted to do with what's been going on. Is they refused to accept the argument that ISIS was Muslim.
Yeah, I have some opinions about that, but going back to the term is condescending. It really is fucking condescending. It's condescending, and it's dismissive of basically the complexity of your identity. But for whatever reason, a lot of Muslims and these activist people adopted it. They embraced it, and this is what I noticed when you have if you have a white guy or a black guy or a seemingly Western person who didn't have a Muslim background make a sound argument that is critical of Islam, right? They'll get accused with this label. But then, I would be in the same room and I'll be like, no, they're right. And then I would elaborate on it some more. But because I fit the description, right? Then all of a sudden it's not Islamophobic anymore. Except sometimes you'll have some deranged idiots who will go far enough to actually call the Muslim an Islamophobe, like what the Southern Poverty
Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yeah, the Southern Poverty Law Center categorized Majid Nawaz. Majid Nawaz is an anti-Muslim extremist.
Yes, he used to be a Muslim extremist.
He used to be a Muslim extremist.
Yes, he's seen it from both sides of the line.
Yeah, and oh man, we actually, Sam Harris, I think, once said that we need like 100 million Majid Nawazes, and I'm like, yeah, we do need that desperately, and I'll get into that a little later. Sorry, I had to rant about fucking Islamophobia.
So something I've noticed with Islam and Muslims in particularly, and you've touched on it quickly, I hope you could expand on it, is
Sure.
two things. One is Muslims seem to be very collectivist.
Yeah.
Extremely collectivist. An attack on one Muslim is seen as an attack on all Muslims, which I find absolutely incongruous with the fact that the Middle East is just chock full of Muslims who are busy fighting one another. And the second, somebody outside their little circle jerk of attacking one another gets involved, they all suddenly are like BFFs and unite to fight that person. I'm like, but you fucking hate their guts, and why are you all BFFs with them now? The other thing is this sort of victimhood complex that they're constantly going on about how they've been so mistreated over the and that doesn't seem to be a new phenomenon. That seems to be something that's quite old. So could you expand upon those two?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard it, but recently that awful rhetorician, Linda Sarsour,
Yes.
claimed that Muhammad was the first victim of Islamophobia. So Muhammad was a revolutionary, and he wanted to radically transform the Arabian society.
Yes, this
And
is when he was
obviously,
preaching in Mecca the first time around.
yeah, and obviously he was met with a lot of hostility. And the same thing goes for his first apostles, the first Muslims, and the shit they experienced was like torture, the like denial of service, which led some of them to starve. Some of them would get murdered. Muhammad had like shit thrown at his like the back of his neck when he was praying. Linda Sarsour actually listed some of those things, and yeah, that was the narrative. Well, I want to say that actually happened, but you don't really know, but you can imagine that it did. And but you have to understand, like, what makes you think that that's anything like you really think that's Islamophobia, like in according to your rationale on what Islamophobia is today, which is like anti-Muslim bigotry. Supposedly that's what it's supposed to mean, but obviously if you criticize Islam in any way, you'll be branded as Islamophobe, but whatever. So there, in the history of Islam and in the story of Muhammad, which if you're a Muslim, you have to like have some basic education, and you will learn that he was harassed, attacked, he was made to starve, and the Muslims were persecuted people, right? They were like the apostates of the time, and they had to migrate to Medina, but the story is that they were sort of chased out, or they had to make their escape to Medina, and they were actually chased. They were being tracked. There's actually a little neat story about it where Muhammad and his buddy Abu Bakr, was it Abu Bakr or Abu Hurairah, one of those two, like they hid in a cave, and even though the tracks led to the cave, and the people who were chasing after him, God in all his infinite wisdom and blah blah blah, sent a spider to build a web in lightning speed, and there was a bird that had its nest there, and the tracker was like, oh hey, if those things are here, then Muhammad couldn't have possibly gotten into this cave because they're undisturbed. And
all the
like that's
explanations you could have used.
Yeah.
That one.
I know, like, why didn't God just fucking smite
Like
them?
a sandstorm gets kicked up and like, that would have been.
Yeah, basically. But which is, by the way, like why spiders don't have such a bad reputation in Islam, right? There's even a surah named after spiders, but whatever.
I thought she was named after cockroaches.
That would be so. So, yeah. So the Muslims, they were persecuted, and they were, when they grew to a decent enough size to be a legitimate threat to the Meccan tribes, Quraysh, or the pagans of Mecca, waged war against Muhammad.
And also
so-
the part about, if memory serves, Muhammad was totally raiding their trade and stealing their shit.
Yep. It's interesting because one of the most heinous crimes in Islam is banditry. And like, if you are a bandit, you will, let's see, they will cut off like your right hand and your left foot, and they'll crucify you afterwards, something like that, something stupid and crazy like that. So banditry, yeah, that's a serious crime that you don't do. But of course, if you're at war, you can do that.
If memory serves, sorry, my memory of what exactly is in the Quran is a little fuzzy at times. The justification was this was after they had to flee Mecca, and their logic was, we're just stealing our stuff back because you guys, took our shit.
I don't think that's in the Quran. It's probably in some hadith somewhere. if that is the case. But you know what? I should actually explain the hadith later, because it's a little bit complicated. But my point is that in the history of Islam and in the narrative of the Prophet Muhammad, there is like this story of persecution and almost like witch hunting, and they had to fight to survive, and there's this hadith that roughly said. Hadith, by the way, is like the oral tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. They're quotes that are narrated by a chain of pious Muslims who lived in his, during his time, and that were then later recorded and documented into like 6 volumes of books. And and hadiths, there's like a whole science, quote unquote, to hadiths, and it based on like certain conditions about the chain of narration. It's either authentic or good enough or weak or just outright false. They have ways to determine this, but when it comes to the authentic hadiths, there's like 6 whole fuck off books about it. And that is the sunnah, the way of the Prophet. Those are the examples that you as a Muslim are to take after. And a lot of the crazy shit in Islam comes from those traditions. That is the Sunni. To be a Sunni would be to not disagree that Abu Bakr Abu Bakr shouldn't have been the first caliph. He should have, and he was. And Ali was right to be the 4th caliph and not the first, because that's the thing that caused the schism between Sunnis and Shias. And somehow the Shias permutated into like a lot of weird different sects, and they make up like roughly like 10% of the whole Muslim population. But whatever, I don't want to get into that right now.
No, that gets into the entire geopolitics of the region for the last 1,500 years, which would be complicated.
Yeah, I'll get into that. But my point is, if you want to find like some of the weirdest, craziest shit in Islam, go look at the hadiths. Go get like Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or any of those things. They're available online. My favorite hadith is this wonderful anti-racist one. And if I recall, it goes something like this: obey your leader, even if he is a black man whose head looks like a raisin. Okay. I can imagine black dudes listening to Muhammad saying this, and they're kind of like, what? Thanks. Like, but to be fair, Islam really was anti-racist. But yeah, then there'd be this weird thing.
Huge slave trade at one point.
Yeah. Well, man, I'll get into the slave shit later.
Oh yeah, what was the line? It dwarfed the American slave trade, and it went on for hundreds of years.
There were Muslim. There were like slave rebellions during the Golden Age. That's something that Where
do you think the term Russians? Where do you think the term Slav comes from?
Anyways, so about the collectivism and the victimhood complex amongst some Muslims. The collectivism that comes from the idea of the ummah. The ummah just Arabic for nation of people. Muslims, because Islam isn't just a religion, it's also kind of it's complicated, but let's just say for simplicity's sake, a political ideology, right? There should be a caliph who succeeds the Prophet in leadership, and all the Muslims are citizens of the ummah, right? They're citizens of the nation. That's why the Islamic Empire was the Islamic Empire, And while it had different dynasties, it was still like one fucking caliphate under one caliph. And so, you know, the collectivism thing, like you have to understand, if you are a man and it's prayer time because you have to pray 5 times a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are actually obligated to find at least one other person to pray with. You can technically still pray alone, but like there shouldn't be an excuse if you can pray with somebody, you know, at a mosque, or, you know, just like in a room, I guess. It's called jama'ah, group prayer. So the rituals are done in groups. The Sharia is applied to the ummah, the people. That's why you have like some of these pan-Islamist types. So and you know, there's a whole lot of emphasis on community, and you'll get hadiths that'll say something like, the non-believer will never accept you until you become one of them, or, you know, God damn the Muslim who takes a non-believer as an ally when he could have taken a Muslim as an ally, or as a friend rather. You know, in the more you know, fundamentalist interpretations, you know, you're not even allowed to greet a non-believer the way that you would a believer, and even when you let them greet you first, and then when you respond to them, you don't even do it. You don't even do the whole thing. So the proper greeting would be assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and then you say wa alaikum assalam, and peace be upon you. But you don't say peace be upon you if you're meeting a non-believer. You wait for them to say it, and then when you respond, you don't say and peace be upon you. You just say and be upon you. That's it. Like there's a lot of
In modern psychology, I guess you would be saying it's almost like a cult. It's defining the in-group and the out-group.
oh yeah,
And constantly making you treat the in-group differently than the out-group, reinforcing the divide between those two populations.
absolutely. And you know, this is no mystery. And I mean, it's no secret in Islamic, and during the Islamic Empire, right? There were Jewish and Christian citizens, and, you know, citizens of other faiths, and believe it or not, there were atheists. They didn't call themselves atheists, and they weren't really called atheists. But there weren't a whole lot. There weren't a whole lot of them, but there were actually some big names that I'm a huge fan of. Like Al-Mahdi, he's my bloody favorite. He had a bust in Damascus that got destroyed by ISIS. I'm pretty pissed about that. Anyways, they would have to pay jizya,
Yes.
a tax.
Yeah.
A fucking, I'm not a Muslim, therefore I must pay this tax. Why? Well, because I'm not allowed to, you know, join the military. Only Muslims get to be in the military. So what am I paying this jizya for? Well, to finance the military so that they could protect us. So like the in-group out-group thing runs more deeply than people think it is, in at least. All right, so I want to address something you said earlier about, you can't possibly tell me that a person that grew up in Indonesia would believe in the exact same thing that a person in Pakistan would believe in, right? They can get pretty close.
Well, they can't.
It might not.
Yeah,
it
makes sense. It's not like there's any rules against everyone not believing the same thing, but just simply my logic is to treat a billion people as being ideologically as part of this ideological hegemony, that they all believe the exact same thing is just absolutely fucking ludicrous to me.
Yeah.
That seems to be the current leftist narrative, and I just don't get it.
Well, here's the thing, right? If you're against Islam on the basis of certain core tenets, then I guess you could apply it to most Muslims, because they'll obviously agree on basic premises, like there is one God, right?
Yes.
And that, Muhammad was his final messenger, unless you're dealing with Ahmadis, which I'm actually kind of fond of. Well, I'm fond of one Ahmadi who was actually the only Muslim who won a Nobel Prize in the sciences. But, funny enough, the country that he was so patriotic about ruled that Ahmadis weren't Muslims anymore. And that's why a lot of Pakistanis moved out of Pakistan because, whatever, sorry, tangent. So the majority of Muslims in the world are Sunnis.
Yes.
Okay. Sunni is you can consider Sunni as being one sect, but in that sect are different schools of thought in terms of jurisprudence, in terms of what Sharia should, what the details of Sharia should be, right? And if my memory serves correctly, there is Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanafi, and Hanbali. I'm gonna say this in Romanized so that you could process it a little bit better. Shafi, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali. And what they differ on is like from my understanding, it's minor stuff. I mean, like for example, if you blaspheme, right? If you leave Islam and you're an apostate, right? And they catch you. Like in one school, I forget which one of them, you would be given 3 days to repent, and you would be spared the death penalty, right? Because they invite you back to the faith. You see, they give you 3 days. Like, are you sure about this? Are you sure you want to stay, an apostate? Because we're gonna have to kind of kill you if you do that. We're kindly inviting you back into the faith. It's the sickest fucking joke. And some other school of law, like I forget which one of them was it, that no, you don't wait 3 days. You give them one, then you kill them if they don't repent. I'm not even sure if one school of jurisprudence would be like, you would have to get your parents' blessings first before you marry somebody. And another one, I think it was the Hanbali or Hanafi, that said like, well, actually, you don't need your parents' blessings. You can just marry the person that you want to marry. Like, it's stuff like that that's different. But at the very core, they're the same. They're Sunnis, and they make up the majority of Muslims. The Ahmadiyya is a minor sect that developed in Pakistan. Was it Pakistan or India? I forget. Because they believe that there's one extra prophet that came after Muhammad. His name was Ahmad. And then the Shia, which are a little more, I was gonna say they're a little more eccentric, but that's not fair saying that, because I come from a Sunni background, right? That's, by the way, it's really interesting trying to compare the two as to like, oh, who's worse or who's better. Both have like fucked up shit.
It's a classic case of pros and cons. A little of this,
Yeah.
a little of that.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm not exactly thrilled seeing mothers slicing their infant's fucking scalp with a knife on Ashura, because that's
Yeah,
tradition.
I've seen
oh,
pictures of
fuck.
that parade. It seems.
Jesus fucking Christ.
What is the origin of that? It seems like such an unusual
It's
tradition.
like it's something to do with one of their imams being. I'm not an expert on Shiism. I used to know this, but my brain isn't working very well right now, and I forgot. But it's something to do with like one of their imams or Ali being viciously attacked, and so they have to like self-flagellate themselves in what I guess in their imagination is of a similar manner, right?
Mhm.
And like you can actually see a compilation of like Shia clerics just beating the shit out of themselves because they can't bear the tragedy of what happened to their their precious dead leaders.
I'm sure
And
we could fill an entire podcast with the
yeah,
relationship between the Shiites and the Sunnis. They've never really gotten along from day one.
oh man, so that brings into another interesting discussion about in groups and out groups, right? And why certain Muslims hate other Muslims that are
From
different from them.
what I've
Um,
observed is with the Sunnis, they seem to have a very different construction of in groups than the Shiites. The Shiites, from maybe this is just from my experience, have been more receptive to socializing with Westerners, whereas my experience has been with people who are particularly devoutly Sunni, which I think is going to be the difference here. They seem more unwilling to accept Westerners as their friends and form relationships.
that's
However,
sorry.
from what I've seen, from what I've been dealing with, is the Shiites I was dealing with, their families actually moved to the West much longer ago, so
Mm,
they've been socializing more with the West,
mm,
and they in particularly didn't like being referred to as Iranian. They preferred to be
right,
referred to as Persian.
right.
Whereas
Oh, I can.
it was some of the leaving from Saudi Arabia and some of the other regions. Um,
That's
it's
interesting.
gonna differ from region to region, and
Yeah.
how when people moved over. But I found with some of the more recent Sunni, at least last time I was really dealing with a lot of Muslims,
Yeah.
they were a little more standoffish. They weren't as
Yeah.
welcoming, but as again, um, a little later, so they've had less time to integrate, and they still uh, characterize themselves as being more part of, I guess you would say, the currently existing collective in these
Yeah.
regions than the
Um.
Iranians.
Interestingly, right? Um. Amongst the Shias is a greater diversity in thought and in beliefs. Like you can consider Shia as being like an umbrella sect or a mother sect, and then within that sect are different flavors of Shias, like the Ismailis and the Jafris, and and then those kind of branch off into different types of Shias. So what I'm saying is that you can expect a greater variety of beliefs, differing beliefs amongst Shias than you would amongst Sunnis. Um, and you see, there's actually, I'm trying to be cautious when I say this. It's possible that amongst the Shias, and I don't know enough to say this, but from what I'm discerning is that what I'm conjecturing actually is that amongst the Shias, there's more room to actually innovate or change certain things from Orthodox Islam,
Well,
right?
actually, that
Whereas
would be make sense, seeing in the
yeah,
history of Iran. Pre the Islamic Revolution, it was a very cosmopolitan region. You can just,
mm,
sure, people are familiar with pictures of Tehran in the 1970s, and you've got
yeah,
women walking around with low-cut shirts and tank tops.
mm-hmm,
Excuse me, low-cut shirts and bell bottoms. They're
yeah,
very westernized, but they're
yeah,
also Muslim,
yeah,
and it was still a Muslim country.
yeah,
And very much the same with portions of Iraq
yeah,
that were Shiite majority portions.
yeah,
And you don't, from maybe it was also a wealth thing, but you don't see that diversity from Saudi Arabia or the
no,
Shiite portions of Iraq, and certainly I would say not the Pakistan in particular seems to have quite the orthodox streak to it.
Pakistan idealizes Arab culture
Yes.
to a degree, and it's really sad because Arabs, by Arabs I mean a lot of Saudis think very little about the Pakistanis. It's a sad like non-relationship, but
Well, not to be
uh,
too mean to the Pakistanis, but a lot of people don't think much of Pakistan as a country. It's kind of this
it,
in between corner world, and They
I
pretty much have been played off by most powers. People have tried to conquer them and failed routinely.
yeah.
I can understand because they seem to get treated like political pawns in the geopolitical game.
Which I don't know. That's kind of dangerous, especially since they're a nuclear power. You know?
Well, how do you think they
But
got their nuclear weapons?
yeah, fuck. But by the way, I remember talking to a Pakistani who I was friendly with here, and we were sort of challenging each other on which country was worse, Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, and we were just one upping each other.
Oh, I mean,
Like,
if it was Tariq Fatah, you're gonna lose that argument.
uh, oh, man, I don't want to get into that right now, but yeah, okay. So you brought up a very interesting point. That is, in the Middle East, you'll have Sunnis and Shias fighting each other brutally, right? They fucking hate each other. I actually just saw footage of the Shia, what was it, MPU or whatever, the Irani-backed one, as one Twitter user claims. I don't know if that's verifiable, but they I saw some really grisly footage of them like fucking torturing and killing Sunnis. And then I'm fucking sure the Sunnis do the exact same thing to them. I mean, hello, that's what ISIS is. I saw a picture, and I'm not sure if it's genuine or authentic or not, but I saw a picture of some of the religious textbooks that ISIS uses, and they look like older editions of the religious textbooks that I had to study early in like elementary and intermediate level.
Do,
Like those
do
were
you
Saudi books.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think they have their own publishing capacity, so they would have
Yeah,
to get those texts from somewhere, and yeah, I guess they would be scavenging up
but
old textbooks from elsewhere.
but fuck, man, they are Wahhabis.
Oh yeah, no shit.
That's
I mean
what
that
that's what
there's
ISIS
no
is.
secret about that one.
Yeah,
I've heard it time and time again, and
yeah, yeah.
quite, I know Zoom's gonna the normal host of the show is gonna kill me for saying this, but Kyle Kowinski I think is quite correct. Is the Saudis are basically the House of Saud is basically ISIS that made it.
Um,
Ideological
I don't
grand scheme
know.
of things in terms of all the ideologies in the world, they're very close together. I'm sure in the Middle East they're further apart, but yes,
Saudi,
their ideology is extremely close together.
Saudi is bloody weird. They every fucking Friday sermon, you hear some of the most toxic shit you'll ever hear in your life, right? And it's no wonder that people get fucking radicalized when they have to hear this every fucking Friday. You know that the television, the network stations, network channels from foreign countries, they corrupt you, and they bring you further away from God, and they tantalize you into committing awful sins. Stay away from that. Stay away from the temptations of the kuffar. And like, you know, during Ramadan, the imam at the Grand Mosque in Mecca would always, you know, in the climax of the group prayer would pray that God would free Palestine, basically destroy the enemies and free Palestine, and destroy the enemies and free Palestine. That's the one prayer that the imam would repeat like 3 times and sob, and everybody in the fucking mosque would like cry and emphatically yell out amen, Ameen in Arabic. And you'd think after 6 fucking decades of doing that, and you know, no progress is being made, that maybe God doesn't care enough to.
It's not just no progress; it's been negative
Yeah,
progress.
it's been negative progress. Yeah, negative progress.
Everyone around Israel keeps on blowing themselves up and tearing themselves down. Israel's just,
Dude,
I'm sure, just sitting there going, "This is great. We don't even have to fight wars with
the,
anyone.
the
We're just gonna
fucking
fight wars with one another."
dude, the fucking Israel schooled 5 fucking Arab armies at the same time. It's fucking brutal.
Though to be
Like,
fair, it was the Yom Kippur War. They damn near lost.
oh yeah,
The Heights of Golan, I think they were down to like facing off the Syrian armored division of like several hundred tanks. The Israelis were down to 8 or something. Like the Israelis came within a hairbreadth of losing.
If that's say what you will, but that actually mirrors some jihad stories, because like in the jihad, in the chronicles of the Islamic battles, the early ones that Muhammad led, right? There wasn't a single battle that the Muslims won where they weren't outnumbered, right? We were taught in school that the angels fought alongside the Muslims.
Yes, there seems to be some disagreement on how many angels in one of the battles. There was something. There was something like there were different waves of the angels. You see, there was the first wave of the angels, but then there were other waves of angels, and how they do the math. It's like it's unclear whether they're like 1,000 or 10,000. And I'm just sitting there listening to this person describe the passages, and I'm just
that's new to me. Actually, I've never heard that one before. We were just told that the angels fought alongside Muslims, and we don't really know how exactly. Like maybe
apparently the
exact
exact description is very unusually worded, and that's what the person was getting at. Just it's an unusual way to phrase things, and it's ambiguous. But whatever. Yes, they were fighting alongside angels somehow.
Yeah. But man, we went to some really weird places. What was? Oh yeah, the in-group out-group thing. Okay, yeah. Your question was, why is it that Muslims, even though they would hate each other because they're Shias and Sunnis, etc., but when some non-Muslim intruder or invader shows up, then all of a sudden, they're not so hostile towards each other.
Yes, I think my words were they suddenly become BFFs.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is anecdotal. Because this is stuff that I would hear my uncles say, but at the same time, you've clearly observed it. So when there are no foreign hostiles, let's just say, then the differences become more salient between the Shias and the Sunnis. And it's like, well, your flavor of Islam is the incorrect one, and I have every right to fight for my correct flavor, right? And they would dehumanize each other. They would call each other, the kafir. You're not a real Muslim, which incidentally is probably what some more extreme Sunnis would call less extreme Sunnis, because you're not as observant as I am. You're a kafir, even though like Islamically you're actually not allowed to call another Muslim a kafir because you don't know what's in their hearts. So if that person wasn't a kafir and you call them a kafir, you become the kafir. That's something. Is that something that you really want to risk? Anyways, that doesn't stop them because they're angry and they hate each other. And they want to fucking kill each other, and they do kill each other brutally.
One another for 1,500 years or something.
But when the kafir shows up, the kafir proper TM, right? Whether they're Jews or Christians or ambiguous in between, mixed, whatever.
Ambiguous group screaming Deus Vult, let's say.
Exactly. Yeah. Hold on a second. They're attacking the Shias. Us Sunnis should be sort of glad about that. Well, not really. Because at least those guys believe in Allah and Muhammad. At least they're Muslim. They got a lot of things wrong. But at least they say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad abduhu wa rasuluh. At least they say that. That's like, that makes them kind of Muslim, right? So we gotta have their backs, even though they don't really commit to that 100%, but there's sort of like this kind of like, oh, well, I don't really want to pick a non-believer's side over a basic Muslim, right? They feel like it doesn't sit well with them.
So basically, the ideology of Islam is so intent on in-groups and out-groups, but it's also capable not of just drawing a line between in-group and out-group that's very distinct. It's able to recognize there's gradations in between.
Yeah. See, the thing is, I have a hard time. Well, there's a very basic reason why I have a hard time doing this, because I don't know all there is to know about Islam, because there's so goddamn much to know, especially the different kinds of Islam that exist. But the reason why we have all these divisions, the reason why we have all this mess, is because Islam is a mess. It's not clear cut. I mean, yeah, it's a little more clear cut than Christianity, let's just say, because it's a more recent book and it's a shorter book, and it's got one author, even though it was passed down by oral tradition first, and then it was written down and codified. But you also have the hadiths to deal with, and then you have to read the tafsir book, the exegesis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, because you can't just read the book and then understand what it's supposed to tell you. You have to read some other quote unquote scholar who lived closer to the time of the Prophet, which makes them somehow more wise or correct in their interpretation. And then there'll be different interpretations. But then also like this weird cult of personality with Ali. I'm not even sure if it's a cult of personality. I actually don't know why people were like, there were Muslims that were so insistent that Ali should have been the first caliph. Like, do you not believe in the will of God? If Abu Bakr was the first caliph, then that means God wills it. I mean, how does that not? How does that? I don't understand the logic behind it. But then there's not a whole lot of logic behind these beliefs, right?
I was about to say, just look at what's going on in the U.S. right now. I mean, yeah, Trump won the election fair and square.
Oh,
and there's
fuck, you're right.
people who still cannot accept, just like with when Obama won, there were Republicans who went, "Not my president," and
Yeah,
look
not
what's
my
going
president.
on. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. It's certainly not a phenomenon that is going to go away anytime soon. But
It's strange, isn't it?
after several hundred years, you think people would have moved on.
Yeah, you'd think we would have learned our fucking lesson, but clearly not. And
Or like
but
a
whatever.
lot of hatred.
Yeah.
It's not about the original
Yeah.
transgression. It's about what happened yesterday. And what happened yesterday was what happened because the day before that. And the day before that
Yep.
often seems to be how a lot of this tribal infighting goes. Then again,
Yep.
you're talking about someone who's born and raised in Canada. There's not a whole lot of tribal infighting around here.
So interesting you bring that up. Well, actually, I had an interesting answer prepared for it. Yeah, don't worry about it. Sorry. In Saudi Arabia, right, is intensely tribalistic. That's just an Arab thing. It was always there. Quraysh was a tribe. So like the tribalist sensibility existed even before Islam, and it continued with Islam, and it's still pretty fucking strong in that country now. And it's part of the reason why Al Saud, the royal family, really want to keep their place in power, because if you get rid of Al Saud, I mean, it's possible that what's going to happen is some kind of Game of Thrones situation where you have all these different tribes fighting over who gets to sit on the Iron Throne. But I'm not exactly sure how the Levantine countries compare in terms of tribalism. I don't think they have that in the way that the Saudis do. But they're so easy. They're so quick to anger. They're so easy to fall into groups. I mean, you've seen Memory TV. Like, you've seen like these clips. By the way, Memory TV, the translations are almost always spot on. And yeah, a lot of it is sections that are edited out, but it's not like you need greater context. They're easy to follow. A lot of them involve shouting matches. A lot of them involve throwing shit at each other. A lot of them, you will see fights where like the fucking table breaks, or somebody throws a chair at the other guy, and it's so shamelessly uncivilized, isn't it? To lose your temper like that, which is ironic because there's a very important hadith where Muhammad said, don't get angry. And you repeated it 3 times. Muhammad would always repeat something like 3 times. You repeat it thrice to emphasize its importance. Don't get angry, don't get angry, don't get angry. And obviously he doesn't mean don't experience the emotion of anger. Just don't act upon your anger. But that flies out the fucking window in that region for some reason. It's not even that region. There's so many pissed off Muslims, man. I don't get it. It's madness, and I don't know where it comes from.
Well, as someone who was born and raised in the West, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm born and raised Canadian, and as I said, we're like America, only more socialist. I mean,
It's a little bit more different than that, you know.
yeah, it's a little more different than that, but the concept in Canada is you don't really have to, if you want to live, in grand scheme of things, a very comfortable life in Canada.
Yeah.
You basically just need to cruise through high school, maybe go to university, get a liberal arts degree, go get a job at some institutionalized company, or maybe
okay.
not even Starbucks. We're talking like a desk jockey, a pencil pusher,
Right.
and you can just cruise through life and be incredibly comfortable. There's no
Yep.
there's no pressure, absolutely no pressure. You're never going to be asked to fight in a war.
Yep.
Chances are no one's ever going to do a serious act of violence to you. You're never going to get mugged. You're never going to get robbed. You're probably never even going to get beaten up in school.
Yeah.
The concept of people getting pissed off at one another in Canada is just, it's almost an alien concept to a lot of people here.
To be fair, I mean, again, you know, that's so pleasantly opposite to where I come from, right? So you can imagine my being attracted to that. But you know what also attracted me to Canadian society was that you have a French province, and the history goes like, oh, okay, they have a French heritage, and the rest of the country has an English heritage for the most part, and they coexist as one country.
Almost
what
not.
the hell? How almost not. Yeah, that I learned later, but like the first superficial impressions is like, and then they're lovely people, and like, you know, how do they do it? How do they get the Sunnis and the Shias to get along, so to speak? Well, but then, you know, I was actually going to make this point after we mentioned the mosque shooting in Quebec City. Like, I looked up if you want to see interesting shit happening in Canada, like by my estimation, I would recommend that you go to Quebec, because that's where the crazy shit happens. That's where you get you'll get a list of terrorist attacks, most of them carried out by separatists, right? Different flavors of separatists, even. Like there was one socialist, like, you know, Marxist Quebec separatist group that wanted Quebec to be like a socialist country. If I remember correctly.
Why am I not surprised?
It's like, let's see, you had like a bombing campaign, right? Like the by the FLQ in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
An average of like 1 every 10 days, right? That's what I read on.
It was so bad we deployed the National Guard. There were soldiers with assault rifles walking around the streets of a Canadian city, and I mean, back then it was absolutely shocking for something like that to happen in the Western world.
Yeah.
And now you go to Europe, and it's just an everyday occurrence, unfortunately, now.
Yeah, which is.
And, well, if you go also into the United States, that's just your average beat cop. Just walking around with it. Well, of course not literally, but with the militarization of their police down here, Canada seems to be, again, this unusual bubble of tranquility.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we'll get, even when we suffer tragedies, right? Even when there are like seriously gruesome crimes, and there have been some seriously gruesome fucking crimes in Canada, you know, we don't talk about it so much. We don't make it we don't sensationalize it as much. I mean, the furthest we've gone was like we made a movie, really shitty movie about that sick couple that raped and killed the sister of the woman in that relationship. But like that's about it. Canadians don't really like watching urban stories, even if there are like cop shows or even if there are like fixed on crime. Canadians like watching shows that are like that represent like the real stereotype of Canada, like Trailer Park Boys and Letterkenny and stuff
Corner
like that.
gas and red green.
Corner gas. Yeah. So if the further you go from the urban side of Canada, the more successful you'll probably be with your stories, and make it funny. God damn it, because like unless you're French Canadian, you don't get to tell a sad story.
To be fair, I've never really understood the Quebecois. They're a strange lot to me. They got their own thing going.
They got their own thing going.
Government subsidized. I take it you're dealing with them a lot more than I deal with the Quebecois. The few times I've had to deal with the Quebecois, they've been as true to form with most French people, quite rude.
Well, I don't know. I haven't interacted with Quebecois who are not Montreal natives, and if you're gonna live in downtown Montreal, you're most likely gonna be speaking English anyways, a lot of the time, or at least that the Quebecois there would understand that English is used more. They have a language police, a literal language police. That's bizarre to me, but at the same time, you kind of have to hand it to them. It's good to be conservative of your culture. Unless your culture sucks, and I don't think the Quebecois culture sucks because they're not something atrocious like Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't be conserved. That should be transformed through a great deal of sacrifice and courage. But like honestly, I can't imagine any reasonable trajectory. I'm terribly pessimistic about that region. And I actually have no ties to it whatsoever. Like as far as I'm concerned, this is my country. This is where I found myself. This is where I learned about the truth. The truth in an abstract sense. My leaving Islam wasn't like the reason why I left Islam is because I have always had moral issues with it. I've always had liberal moral intuitions ever since I was a child, to the point where I actually assumed that slavery was haram in Islam, right? And it was a fucking shock when I learned that it wasn't. But it's like, well, don't worry, because like Muhammad made it like he incentivized freeing slaves so that eventually slavery would be abolished. And I'm like, what did it take for slavery to be abolished in the Muslim world? The fucking intervention from the British and the Americans.
Yep.
Great.
People seem to fit that it was into the 1950s, into the early 60s. You could still get slaves in Saudi Arabia.
The last slave market closed in 1962 in Saudi Arabia, 1970 in Oman. I forget the other countries in the region.
And according to various NGOs in the United Nations, effective slavery is still practiced in the Middle East and throughout Southeast Asia. I think there was one line, there's more people living in slavery today in the modern world than ever before.
That's pretty fucking depressing. I mean, by slavery, I guess maybe there. I know that the situation in Qatar truly is atrocious and it warrants that description. I'm not sure where exactly in Saudi Arabia that would apply, but fair enough. It's not like foreign labor workers in Saudi Arabia are treated well.
Most of the focus now seems to be in Southeast Asia and countries like Bangladesh.
I'm not familiar with it. Like, is it like a similar situation to Qatar, or are we talking like human trafficking?
My understanding is would I guess fall under the term indentured servitude. That these
Then,
people have just
oh,
been
okay.
placed in an economic situation where they might as well be slaves. They have no freedom. They can't leave their work. They're treated incredibly poorly. As I said, they can't leave. They have no freedom of mobility.
We might have Americans like that since they they accrued a terrible debt from their student loans, uh, where they probably cannot hope to uh, you know pay it off, since they're not going to get careers in the fields that they studied, especially if they studied shit like
Underwater basket.
environmental studies.
I just call all of them underwater basket weaving because that might as well be what you've learned.
Yeah. Anyways, so I would have these moral issues with Islam, and I would just kind of shove them to the back of my head because I was a fucking kid. What the hell was I gonna do? At age 14, I started questioning like why this religion and not any other religion, right? And then I started researching other religions on Wikipedia when I actually got it, when I discovered it, which I became instantly addicted to. And I know there are problems with Wikipedia, but it's not. You could learn so much, and you could check your facts later. It's like a documentary in written format, except it's more expositional. It's just that the person who wrote it could be wrong about a lot of things, or they had a filter, an ideological filter. But it's a start to get some basic information at least. But I didn't know that when I was fucking 14, right? I just looked into other religions, and none of them were convincing to me. And then I'm like, well, why would Islam be convincing, right? So I just sort of stuck with it as a Pascal's wager sort of thing, and I didn't even know what Pascal's wager was at the time. But now you're trying to imagine that you're trying to stay sane while trying to reconcile this fucking can of worms of a religion, that if you leave, you'll suffer some serious fucking consequences. And there aren't a whole lot of 14-year-olds with the testicular fortitude to actually do that. And the love and appreciation for Western culture, a lot of which is antithetical to that system of belief, right? So the way to stay sane, and while you're juggling this shit, is to adopt some wishy-washy epistemic relativist stance on truth, which honestly, now looking back at it, I may have went insane to take on a position like that. But even then, I knew that, like, looking back at it, I wasn't consistent with it. I was clearly terrible at it because I care too much about knowing something, about learning about something. It's just a curiosity compulsion, which annoys me because I'm not smart enough to understand issues at a very complex level. I just have to know what it is, and then I'll torture myself trying to. I tortured myself trying to understand what it meant that the geometry of the universe is flat. It took me like a long time to understand what it was, and somebody could have just explained it to me in a fucking sentence. That whatever, tangent. Point is, a few years ago, there was a situation where I had to confront a serious moral issue, and before that happened, I read a lot of philosophy, and I realized what kind of education I was given in Saudi Arabia, which is one that I honestly would say like is almost intentionally to make you docile and void of independent thought, and to dull any like capacity for critical thinking. I became obsessed with critical thinking. I read so many primers and did so many like online tests to just sharpen that ability. Like I read informal and formal logic, and I was bloody fucking obsessed with it. And philosophy was the most exciting thing for me to read at that time, because it's available on Wikipedia and PDF and the library, and those books were banned in Saudi Arabia. The only philosophy book I have stumbled upon was like this used copy of the Republic, and that's not that I'm not that interested in it. I'm more interested in ethics and epistemology. Epistemology was super fucking useful for me because it helped me ground myself after going through a literal existential crisis. After I so philosophy and the study of philosophy and critical thinking equipped me with some capacity to pull myself out of that existential abyss after I just because honestly, courage, some kind of intellectual courage is required if you are going to be an honest truth seeker. And I have to constantly ask myself if I am lacking said courage when I'm confronting an issue, because I learned it the hard way. My becoming an agnostic isn't like, it's only a byproduct of shifting epistemic let's just say perspectives, right? I like I said, I used to be some kind of honestly bit of a nihilistic epistemic relativist, because what kind of existence is this where you're not sure what something, whether something is true or not, and the God that is supposed to be the alpha and omega of everything is this cunt who says, who points a gun at your head and says, say that I am peaceful or I'll shoot you. Like, that's my impression of him, because he's supposedly the most gracious and merciful thing in meta existence, but there's hell. Anyways, yeah, so leaving Islam was a byproduct of my grappling with the issue of the truth, and it was triggered by a moral issue that I had to confront, and I had to confront it with fucking courage, because I tell you, there's only so many fucking difficult times and situations in your life that you can just sort of like, okay, fine, you experience it as shitty, but then now you let's just move on. God wills it. Whatever God writes, that'll be our destiny. That's a very common attitude, by the way, amongst Muslims, at least in Saudi Arabia. Just very fucking disgusting. I hate the idea of predestination.
Well, very much also in Christianity, with the concept of you'll often hear the refrain, God has a plan. Or it's all in God's plan. It seems to be very common within religion. I think mostly because I got an ongoing theory that a lot of people who get very religious, it's because they don't have a concept of the spoken truth, which is weird because that's
Logos
is very entwined with Christianity. You'll hear Jordan Peterson particularly go on about it.
Yeah.
I kind of got introduced to the concept a little earlier before listening to Jordan Peterson.
Same. I got introduced to it weirdly by this book called "Thank You for Arguing," which just basically explains rhetoric, and that that it comprises of ethos, pathos, and logos.
That's when I got introduced. It was funny enough in high school, and it was just a passing comment from our English professor on how to construct an argument. And I became kind of fascinated with the concept of, in my case, about the concept of spoken truth, specifically. Okay, we have this attitude in Western civilization that science is the best definition of truth we have.
Hmm.
However, when you're arguing with people, and whenever I tried to use a scientific argument, I never won.
Right.
However, when I saw people use a pathological argument, they always won, and I'm just like, the fuck is going on? But for me, it wasn't in a religious sense. It was just in this sort of psychological.
Yeah, psychological.
For me, I couldn't handle the difference between there's what everyone said and then there's what everyone did.
Right.
And I think we're coming at you've got a different background, but I think we're kind of dealing with something similar. And I kind of want to maybe push the conversation in a different direction here to something more about what's going on in the West right now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let's.
And something I think we're both frustrated with is that sort of epistemology. That
the fucking postmodernism.
Yeah. And
okay.
Every time I hear postmodernism and then I butt it up against the rhetoric I hear coming out of the Muslim community, I'm like, you people are in love with the same concept of being able to just have these incredibly pliable definitions of truth.
Right. So, man. So, Western culture, right? When I first came here, when I first moved here, which was few years ago, I assumed that we were still with this whole classical liberal sensibility, right? Where it's kind of fucked up if you keep bringing up somebody else's race, for example. Mm-hmm. It's like, why are you doing that? What are you racist a little bit? So the weird postmodernism thing, like, by the way, let's hashtag not all of postmodernism is garbage, but like a hefty fucking amount of it, especially when it's practiced contemporarily in university campuses, pretty much is, because I remember I actually showed you an example of like the kind of obscurantist verbose word salad of like an abstract from some fucking dissertation that some idiot wrote in some like liberal arts program, and it's like there was a code in that fucking paragraph. Anyways, that was the first thing where I felt like there was something wrong. We were assigned readings in some of the classes that I've taken, where the language was so convoluted, and we were instructed to deconstruct the text. Like, I spent more time trying to construct meaning in my head by deciphering what the hell the writer is trying to say with their ridiculous grammatical gymnastics. I like, you read it like 3 times, then you come up with like simpler synonyms in your head, and then you construct a simpler sentence, and you're like, why the hell didn't they just write it that way? And you know why they didn't write it that way is because there's no actual substance to the shit that they're writing. And I gave you an example on this piece that this guy wrote about the film noir as a genre, or not, and he used Plato's theory of forms and what he called Nietzsche's flux metaphysics and God is dead to be like some kind of erosion of fixed meaning.
Yeah, I don't know quite how you get from God is dead to film noir, but
it's just that here's what he said. It's like God is dead is tied to the idea that there's going to be an erosion of moral standards as Christian sensibilities diminish, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But then he says, like, but then he ties it to Nietzsche's flux metaphysics. This is what the writer calls it. I don't think Nietzsche ever called it that.
Yeah, I'm
but
not
that
familiar with him saying
yeah,
flux, but it may be in a text I didn't read or I forgot about.
the idea is that because everything is in constant motion, because everything keeps changing and moving is now equivalent to change. So what it used to be now isn't the same anymore because it's the planet isn't the same anymore. Something cannot stay in one form. So there's a kind of epistemic nihilism there, so to speak. Since the truth is not fixed, it keeps changing. It's something like that, and so
I would,
but
I kind of get the argument, and I would phrase it as Nietzsche came up with the concept that what is truth, and he came up with a very interesting definition of truth, a purely functional definition. Truth is whatever alleviates suffering. Whatever alleviates people's suffering, they're going to accept that as the truth, because as far as they're concerned, it's good. It's making
that's
them
interesting.
happy. So yes, the world is always changing, and the pressures and systems that a person is interacting with are going to change. So the pattern of behavior that may have been successful in a previous environment, now that that environment has changed, may not be alleviating your suffering anymore, and you've got to develop a new pattern of behavior.
Man, that yeah, I think Peterson talked about that too, and I'm not exactly 100% on that yet. I can
I
because
I'll
the
take that
way
as a compliment because I don't think Peterson. He probably has. This sounds like a very Peterson thing, but
yeah, I think he said something about how do you alleviate suffering? You do it by speaking the truth. And I think you actually phrased it very similarly to the way he phrased it, but I can't recall
I
right
wouldn't be
now.
too surprised that guy has a
Yeah,
way of talking that just worms its way into your head and starts
he's
co-opting your neural pathways. Uh,
it,
and I think
it,
it's his analytical approach. I think people are picking up on that it is an effective tool to
ar- ar-
ascertain what's going on.
articulate is incredibly sexy, and I am incredibly unsexy throughout this whole podcast because my brain is in 9 different places and it wants to say so much.
Well, you were talking about you watch you mentioned earlier about Jordan Peterson and how
Yeah,
he was presenting the lecture, and it's very much a train of thought.
yeah.
And
He sort of had like a map on what he was going to think about, and he clearly planned for it, but at the same time he didn't rehearse it. And the way he argued, okay, what he said was, when I lecture, I'm actually thinking out loud, and that helps me like sharpen my thoughts more, or something like that. It makes me push beyond what I already know, especially, and I'm guessing it helps that when the students ask questions, that's some kind of feedback to the lecture.
now,
So he realized,
now
yeah,
compare that to the approach being demonstrated by this writer you were talking about film noir.
yeah, he contradicts himself, because what he's saying is that film noir cannot be, like Nietzsche's flux metaphysics, cannot be defined, and it is rather a mere, what makes film noir films similar to each other, such that you can categorize them as film noir, is that they all share a pessimistic sensibility that ties into the erosion of moral standards. That's how we tied it to God is Dead. And I'm like, but you just defined it. You went through this whole bloody text. Just at the end, you contradict yourself by defining it. It's fine. All right, you're saying that it's not a genre, but you define it as a thing, a category of films that share this pessimistic sensibility. Like, well, what do you want about? And like the language, but that's not. I'm not saying that this is what's common in these academic writings. It's mostly the language. the bloody language that these people employ. I really wish you would have suffered the same amount of pain that I did having to read this shit. And it's unmemorable. Like, who
Mind
wrote
if I
what.
made an interesting conclusion?
Go ahead.
I think that you think that what you're hearing in modern Western institutions is the exact same that you heard from your theocratic teachers in Saudi Arabia.
I was gonna get to that.
Ah,
So you know, I learned about feminism on campus, and I was like, well, what is it? And it's like, well, you know, it's an effort to bring just equality between the genders. And I'm like, oh, I thought you already had that since like the 90s at the very least, you know. And it's like, well, no, there are all these problems. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm probably not that observant, so I should pay closer attention. Oh shit. and then you know, I've come across this kind of postmodernist language, and I'm like, why is it so obscurantist? Why is it just not written in simple language like it should be? It sounds like you're trying to bamboozle me here. But then the day that I knew I was done with feminism was this stupid trend of rhetoric, where this thing popped up where it's like you're either feminist or you're sexist. And I just immediately got a flashback to some Wahhabi clerics saying you're either a Muslim or you're not, should you fail to meet these ridiculous ultra-conservative standards. And I'm like, fuck you, you don't get to tell me what I am. You don't get to force that label on me. So yeah, you're right in your conclusion. It's actually very fucking accurate. It started with that, and then it ties into. It became more apparent to me that it's ideological lunacy, because there's so much. There's a lot of fucking effort into controlling your language, and the reason why
well, language is thought.
Language is thought,
Yes.
and you know, if
Your
there's
language,
one
just
thing,
for the audience here, this is really important to understand. When you're thinking about the world, you think about
Yeah.
cat, dog, chair. Yes, that's language, but within that language, there's a core set of ideas about how to interpret all those objects. What gets
Yeah.
categorized into what, but also particularly the functions of each object.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the SJWs, but also particularly you see it with the religious people. Language is very important because they're specifying the functions of objects.
That's interesting. I am in agreement that it is the stuff of thought. I actually learned that from Noam Chomsky. I know that people don't like Noam Chomsky and you know, in these political circles, but you know,
I got it from British prog rock band Yes. Kid you not.
Yes.
I'm walking to the store one day. I'm listening to Yes, and it's strength can't do justice without words of new languages.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm thinking about that one and just processing my brain. I'm like, wait.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't catch that. I like Yes quite a bit. I thought people were getting into Yes again with that fucking JoJo's Bizarre Adventure meme.
I'm not a huge fan of Roundabout. I'd rather people be listening to like
I
Starship
like
Trooper.
Roundabout. I like Roundabout a lot.
It's kind of, I don't know. At least people aren't getting into like Owner of a Lonely Heart, which is completely different from anything else they've ever done.
Yeah.
I'm just like, guys, no, listen, that is not Yes. That's like some sort of a tribute band that just doesn't understand the source material. But anyways.
But it is. But it is Yes.
Somehow I had to bring up Yes.
Yeah. We talked about a few good bands in this which I apologize for, chaotic interview podcast. We talked about Rush and Megadeth and yes.
It's very rare to find someone who's into Megadeth and yes.
Dude, like progressive metal is like my shit, and so like I would dig into their influences, and a lot of it would be bands like, you know, Pink Floyd and Rush and Yes and Genesis and stuff like that.
Ugh,
And
Genesis.
Kansas.
Ugh.
Oh
Kansas,
man, there we go. We have a
yeah,
hater.
fucking right.
I have. I'm the annoying guy who's like, I like everything.
Oh god, at least you said you did. At least you did not bring up Journey. I'm sorry, but if you like Journey, we cannot be friends. We cannot be friends.
Separate Ways Journey, or is that Whitesnake? I can't remember.
All Journey.
Well, old Journey surely can't be that bad, right?
No. Not old. All.
Oh, all Journey. Okay. So
It bans language. Yes. The
Language,
policing. Yes.
yeah,
Funny
language
how
policing. Yeah,
we both got to the same point, probably at about the same thing, realizing the language
So-
tricks.
if you are an ideologue who wants to control other people's thoughts, which that's what controlling language is. That's what you're trying to do. You're an enemy of mine. Plain and simple.
That's
I mean,
what-
I try to talk to you, you know, I'll still treat you like a human being, clearly, but I have too much fucking baggage with censorious sons of bitches like you know, the theocratic dictatorship that I'd rather just fucking put behind me forever if this country is merciful enough to let me in and stay
Oh,
forever.
We'll see how the next election goes.
Oh god. Man, isn't like the candidate for leader of the Conservative Party like just like Stephen Harper 2.0?
You know, at this point, I wouldn't mind Stephen Harper
Really?
2.0. Trudeau and his cabinet. Wow, going back to Canadian politics here, we could. Hey, welcome to the Canada cast.
Yeah, man. Well, welcome to.
I have serious issues on a technical and ideological basis with Trudeau and his cabinet. Or I think will go down in history as, and I'm just going to make the claim, the absolute worst government Canada has ever had.
You think so?
Yes, they are absolutely fucking atrocious. On a technical level, they're all rookies. They have no experience in any of their departments. And then you start looking at them ideologically, they're fucking ideologues. They're SJW ideologues.
But my dude, half of his cabinet are women. How can you say that they're incompetent? Are you a sexist?
Excuse me for treating everyone like an individual. I don't know how I managed it, but I managed to get through the fucking Canadian education system right before all the SJW nonsense hit. So, everyone was beating in line. You treat everyone like an individual. You don't see race. You don't treat people depending on their race. Everyone is an individual. You do not do this categorization nonsense.
You know what's funny is that's a conclusion that I reached on my own as a teenager by simply quietly rejecting the racist and like, you know, in group out group bullshit that, you know, the school tried to indoctrinate me with. The most successful they ever got, by the way, was making me hate Jews while having no idea why I should.
But
then,
you mean it isn't obvious?
Like,
I'm sorry.
No,
you're talking to a dude that some people seem to think I'm Jewish because I'm such a tightwad.
you are a little bit on the negative side. By the way, I broke out of that undeserved anti-Semitism by once being interested in the idea of having heroes, and I wrote basically a list of people that I would consider as heroes, and all the people in the top 10 were Jews. I was like, why the hell do I hate these people again? These are some of the coolest, awesome people ever. And then like, they were teaching us to hate Jews before I even learned that they worship the same God. And it's not like they told me that. I had to ask. Like, what did the Jews worship again? God. You mean there's more than one religion that does that? I was fucking like 6 or something. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's about when
Anyways.
I had that same epiphany of wait, it's everyone's worshiping allegedly the same God. This is
Yeah.
so confusing. Why does
Yeah.
the same God want to be worshipped in like 8 different ways?
Well, you see, the Jews and the Christians have tampered with the holy book / message that Allah sent to them, right? And Muhammad was meant to be the final prophet to fucking just bring to you the word of God directly, and like, you know, haven't been tampered with, 100% accurate since Revelation, and we can prove this somehow. I don't know how. We can't really, but you know, that's the logic behind Islam and Muhammad, and apparently like that's one of the reasons why innovation or reformation really, I think that's what innovation is referring to, changing the values of certain commandments or tenets or what have you will be considered a blasphemous or heretical in the extreme degree, because you're being just like those bad Jews and those bad Christians who have tampered with the holy texts and perverted their religions into what we now understand as Judaism and Christianity, which is why, like, in my opinion, Reformation is very difficult for Islam, even though like we need it and we need it bad. And then, like, I
So
think
this has been something that's been troubling me, and I really
Yeah.
don't have an answer for it. What
Me
in the
neither.
hell is it going to take to get the Islamic world?
I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, I
Even
sometimes
sit
think
down
it
and
might.
acknowledge that there might just fucking might be a problem.
Honestly, I think it might have to come obviously not from the moderate Muslims, not from the Muslims that we deal with every day, and we're just normal fucking people who want to live their lives just like the rest of us. It's the people whose values are so different from ours, right? So they'll most likely be living in the Muslim world, and I wonder sometimes if they need something as catastrophic as World War II to shake up their faith or their conception of their existential disposition, to make them think that, oh shit, this isn't gonna work. You know, maybe I was wrong. Maybe we need to change some things so that we could, you know, alleviate the suffering, so to speak.
The only 2 parties I could think in the Middle East that would have that kind of a conflict. I'm sure most people are already thinking, "Oh, you mean like Saudi Arabia and Israel?" And no, actually, it's Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia and Iran.
In Iran, yeah.
Yeah. Those are the only 2. Like, you go back to the in-group and out-group thing. It has to be an in-group conflict. It's a well-established conflict. There's old blood, and
Remember when I told you, like, you know, the Sunnis and the Shias will fucking brutalize each other until there's like a foreign you know, enemy that'll make them kind of put aside their differences a little bit, like just superficially. That's what we were on about.
So what, we just somehow let these Iranians and the Saudis go at it and just stand by and watch them genocide one another?
It's like, well, no, they must really hate each other when Saudi Arabia is cozying up with Israel, and in a hush hush capacity, because, you know, they've invested so much time and rhetoric, you know, indoctrinating the citizens into hating Israel. But now it's like, oh shit, they may be valuable allies because we both have issues with Iran. And like that's hilarious to me. Just seeing those two flags next to each other in a photo is hilarious to me. Like they're buddies. It's like Israel and Saudi Arabia versus Iran. Yeah, that'll make you think about shit.
We are coming up to 2.5 hours, and I know I start to have file size problems once I hit 2.5 hours. We're kind of starting to hit into what I would call the third part of the interview, which is Islam, Europe, and the future.
Oh, here we go.
So I suggest we put a pin in this one and we reschedule another interview for another time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Excellent.
Yeah,
It's a date then.
All right.
So this
Sorry
has
for
been
that.
this has been
Yeah.
a special edition of the Edgecast LOVEseat with Garum and a man who sells carp by the seashore.
I sell carp in good prices.
Very good prices. Good
Not
night,
more than
everyone.
1 shekel. Night.